EventNewsDXB.
You're listening to the EventNewsDXB podcast, your behind-the-scenes look into the world of events in Dubai, the UAE and the MENA region. I'm Ian Carlos, and each week I'll bring you the behind-the-scenes, inside stories from the people shaping one of the world's most dynamic event markets. This week we're talking to Rob Statham, Creative Director, and Jake Smith, Special Projects Lead at the Events House, an international event company who operates, in the words of Jake, at the crossroads of technical precision and creative brand storytelling. Between them, they have the rather enviable job of flying around the world with Formula One. They were recently in the Middle East at the Saudi Arabian and Bahrain Grand Prix, where they were responsible for setting up some very high-tech and immersive brand experiences in the F1 fan zone. Rob, Jake, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here. Likewise.
I think we'll just dive straight in. Normally I get the guests to tell us a little bit about how they got into events, but you know what? I'm just going to jump straight into the company that you work for. Rob, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the Events House and what it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Events House was founded 16 years ago now by our two founders, Dave House and Adi Tingle. It was launched primarily as a classic events company, delivering what at the time was things like Giant Jenga into local events, and kind of grew out from there. Then started to get more of a tech focus to it. And we sort of started then leaning into more around the simulator world and digital world. And then a few years in, got the chance of a contract with working with Formula One. And that's really led us to where we are now, being a global supplier of the Formula One fan zone as one of our key sort of strings to our bow. And then outside of that, working with a lot of partners and F1 sponsors within the motorsport world, delivering experiential and tech to partners globally. We have a UK base now in Swaddling Coat in the Midlands, and then also sort of in the process of expanding into the US and the Middle East as well.
And we'll come on to the Middle East, obviously, in the course of this podcast. Let's just backtrack just a little bit. Can you give us a really brief sort of overview of how you ended up in events? I ask most guests this because there's been a few exceptions, but many people, it seems that they fall into it later in life.
Yeah.
Not many people sort of wake up in the morning, you know, at the age of 10 and go, I want to be an event producer.
No, absolutely. I certainly, when I was younger, didn't have the aspirations to be working in events. Been a motorsport fan since I can remember, so that's always been a kind of a constant going through it. And you know, always loved when I was a kid watching the overhead shots of seeing kind of what was going on around the track. But yeah, I very much stumbled into it. I didn't really know what I was doing in my sort of mid-20s. Ended up running a marquee company of my own locally, doing the classic kind of weddings and those kind of things, and then went from there and again, stumbled into becoming a partner in a structure supply company called Airclad, and then stumbled into, during COVID, working with an Australian-based company, launching them in the UK called SpaceCube. And then I've known Dave and Adi at Events House for quite a number of years, having worked with them sort of probably 10 years ago on some of their early F1 stuff. Mm-hmm. And there just naturally became a point where, for me coming on board as creative director for the business, kind of made sense. So that happened last year, and that's kind of where I've got to now in the events world. I very much kind of stumbled into it, not through any kind of plan when I was younger, but I mean, great industry to be in.
Yeah. Well, I'll come on to your role, Rob, as creative director. But yeah, Jake, how about yourself? How did you end up in events?
Yeah, so I actually got into it through the simulator side. So I was a bit of a sim racer and looking for a summer job. Came across Events House, started my career with Events House, going down to Williams F1, running their sort of in-house hospitality over the race weekends. Continued that as I was studying. I was studying engineering with a view of being an engineer in Formula One. And then eventually this events thing just grew and grew. I came out of university with the opportunity to go into it on more of a full-time basis. And yeah, the opportunity of traveling the world around the F1 races was a bit too good to turn down. So went for that, and here we are.
Well, look, it's your work on the F1 events that's obviously piqued my attention, hence this podcast. So, Rob, maybe you can tell us about, and particularly, I guess, in relation to the Middle East, because I know you were obviously in the region just recently with the F1 circus. So tell us a bit about what you do there, what you actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of the business now, and has over the last few years really expanded us into not just a supplier, but more of a pure agency. And that's really where Jake and I sit within the business, and myself as creative director and Jake as creative lead. We're working much more on experiential activations, and the one that you're referring to was out in the Middle East. It kind of kicked off there for this season. We worked with the client Aramco for the last 2 years, but this is the first year where we really put some really heavy experiential focus onto it in delivering at Bahrain and then Saudi. It's a 4D immersive cinema experience, and we've developed that whole concept with some local suppliers. And with the agency that we're working with, they've created a whole piece of nice immersive cinema. We've created all the tech around it, and then worked with a Canadian-based company on the actual motion seats, and plugged in a lot of other tech around that, which Jake can certainly dig into more. But yeah, as I say, we're really pushing now into this experiential world more and more. And I think as we're seeing so many partners coming on board, especially with F1 and their big push to more and more partners, over the last couple of years, we've seen some huge brands come into it in the likes of Lego, which we've seen recently in some unbelievable experiential, that the full-size Lego cars in Miami, which Jake and I were lucky enough to be there to see. And then other partners like Kit Kat have come on board, and Hot Wheels coming on board, and several others that we kind of hear the rumblings about, these big brands coming on, and there's such an appetite to lead in the sort of the experiential world around the races, and they're all finding really good traction there.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to ask you both, actually, because where do you think the renewed, I'm not going to say renewed interest, but I think the increased interest in brands wanting to get into the experiential space? I ran a production company for many years, and we did a lot of, I stopped that 10 years ago, but the 10 years prior to that were the sort of heydays of branded content, and we were doing all kinds of video content. But what I did notice was that with the rise of social media, in particular short-form content, there was a direct correlation between the appetite for branded content, which declined, and then the increase in brands wanting to get into experiential. I don't know whether over the course of your careers you've sort of noticed the same, but I am curious to know where the increased interest is coming from. Jake, do you want to have a go at that one?
From my perspective of it, as someone who's obviously grown up around social media, I've sort of seen that explode from a branded perspective. Social media content, social media activations, and then this sort of big influencer phase that's come in over the last 5 years or so. I feel like brands are receiving a lot of pressure now to try and cut through the noise of that and do something that really does stand out and something different from the others. And Experiential seems like a perfect vessel to do that, rather than just another sort of social media campaign. And what we're seeing more and more with our clients is these experiential activations not just being for the fan who's there in person, but also being a trampoline for the social media content around it. I mean, we've just delivered a big job in the States for eBay, and that activation was sort of half content studio, half experiential space over the course of the weekend. So the opportunity for them to almost double on their return of investment and get hands-on feel with the brand, but then also be able to still use it as a vessel for social content, I think is, in my opinion, driving it.
Rob?
Yeah, I think Jake's made some really great points there and absolutely valid. Adding to that, your question around where we're seeing this, whether that's in the West or out in the Middle East, I think we're seeing it globally. Certainly the Middle East, there's a huge appetite in the Middle East for not necessarily even Middle East-based brands, but global brands wanting to activate there. It's such a key market. We're seeing that more and more, and advising our clients that the Middle East is a great place to be activating, especially at races. I mean, we both saw out in Bahrain and Saudi sort of what a family-friendly event they are. It's a really big day out. I actually don't think that necessarily that there's a huge F1 fan base out there, but I think that people see it as an unbelievably fun day out. Like in the UK, where you see the Gold Cup or the Grand National, they're big days out for people, but it's not necessarily people that are hugely into horse racing. It's just a day on the calendar where everybody gets together and goes out. And in Saudi, for example, the Sunday was a national holiday there, or not a national holiday, a regional holiday, because of the race. And I think you see more and more of that. But then on the flip side of it, out in the US especially, 40% of all sponsors now that are involved in F1 are US based companies, and we're seeing a lot more activation going over on in America, and sort of, which has always been interesting because, as you say, kind of content and TV advertising was a thing that was really driving there. I think that where we're that's really galvanizing now is that the move for brands into F1 and physical activation is now trickling down, and we're starting to see it into IndyCar and NASCAR as well, where traditionally spectators were lower and the spend around activation was lower, but we're certainly seeing that more and more.
The Middle East is an interesting market, especially in relation to sort of motorsport. I think we used to do a lot of work for the Dubai Autodrome back in the day when I ran my production company. And I think what people realised, certainly myself, who wasn't into the motorsport scene before working with Dubai Autodrome, I think what I quickly realised is that whilst there's a massive appetite in the Middle East for car culture, that doesn't translate to motorsport. And sadly, no matter, I think, despite the best efforts of Dubai Autodrome, certainly on a club level, we weren't able to just get the audience interested in the same way as perhaps there is in other parts of the world. Moving on, though, I mean, both of you are involved in obviously the creative aspect of events. So, for someone who's a layman, tell me, what does an event creative director do? Rob, do you want to have a crack at that first?
Yeah, I can do, yeah. I feel like a lot of my job is really telling Jake what to do, and that's probably pretty mean. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do is, as a creative director, is really... Jake and I work very collaboratively on a lot of projects, and it helps having two perspectives on it. But
yeah.
My role within the Events House as creative director is really there's a lot of hand-holding with clients when they come to us. A lot of the clients that we see already work with agencies, creative agencies already, but where Events House gets involved is because of our knowledge of F1 and motorsports and how to engage those fans. So I think a lot of my role is how we take a client's desire to activate and translate that into sort of a motorsport or Formula One language, and a language that the fans will understand rather than just your general public, because it is quite different. And the way that Experiential works at F1 is similar to the wider events world, but there are some sort of nuances and some differences of how it works, and in some of that is even just taking into consideration the environment that you're in, or the weather, or the fact that at certain times of the day it's going to be really quiet because everybody's going to be in the stands watching the races. A lot of these things are things that people aren't considering. So it's how we take, sort of the creative ideas that clients are coming to us, or creative wishes, and then translate that into experiential that really works within F1, and how we can gather the data and give them the output that they really need and manage their expectations as to what that might look like.
So, Jake, how many of the clients that you deal with, how many of them have done experiential before? I mean, how much of it is hand-holding, and how much of it is there obviously an experience level already there?
I couldn't put a percentage on how many we've got that have done experiential before. I can think of a few examples. I think it's probably easier when people have done it before, purely because there's an opinion of what works and what doesn't already. And if they've come to us for an F1 activation, it might be because they've done something before and it hasn't sort of hit the mark. What we're trying to do now is everything that we put out needs to be creatively aligned and also relevant to the sport. I've seen so many brands sort of pop up in fan zones, pop up around Formula One and not quite hit the mark and get it right. So what we're trying to do internally is make sure that, we are on the money every single time. I think, as I said, probably a little bit easier when there's a little bit of background experience, but it's also an exciting challenge to start from scratch and really sort of like forge out a new path with it, and have creative freedom to be able to sort of apply new tech to it, apply new experiential to it, and really start to think about things in a different way and almost push the boundaries of what you could do with these brands, which is one of my favorite bits about it.
So when you meet a client, if I think back to when I was doing branded content, a lot of my role at that point in time was fairly educational, in the sense that obviously clients, they want to sell. So there's an expectation that from them to certainly have, a ton of branding and preferably their product in just about every single shot. And that was one of the tough things we found with trying to pitch branded content back in the early days, was that a lot of clients were fairly alarmed at the idea that their product wouldn't be in shot at all, or the idea that some of the best branded content didn't feature the client at all. Yes, there might have been some branding here and there, But obviously it was the adage that, if the audience feels as though they're being sold to, then they tune out. So I wondered whether that was something that you have to build into your sort of approach with clients, particularly obviously the ones that haven't done experiential before, or whether your experience has been different. Rob, do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Several of the clients that we work with, they're not selling a physical product, especially Aramco. Nobody that's going to an F1 race is buying oil specifically. None of us are going out and buying a barrel of oil, but it was very important for them to have their brand there and putting their brand message out. And obviously all very protective of their brand. And, at the races out there, that their logos are plastered across everything. So, yeah, I think we are still finding it very important, but trying to sort of guide clients in ways to be subtle with branding or clever with branding. I mean, it was the same with the eBay out in Miami. eBay themselves are not a product that you can buy. It's just a platform where you can buy other people's products. So they were quite clever in the way that they did that. But yeah, I think that going back to the point before around the social media element of it and how those two things combine, there's still a big want and need for brands to have a presence there, because it then translates into sort of their online presence through social media and that sort of Instagram moment that everybody's looking for. So yeah, it is still very important. Absolutely.
Feeding the beast. I wanted to ask you then, what's the first thing that you look for then when you get in a creative brief? When a new client comes in, and Rob, I'll ask you this first, but I'll obviously also ask Jake, because I know you guys work together very closely, as you said.
Yeah, the first thing I look for is a budget. But no, after we've had a skim through to see if they've given us a budget, yeah, it's really looking to see that. I think the first thing really is whether they've got any steer on it as to how it can be motorsport related, or how we translate it to a motorsport or an F1 fan. We'll see briefs where we look at them and think it's going to be quite difficult to translate that into a language which works in the environment which we're working in. So I guess that's the first thing, and that will really guide us down the direction that we're going to go creatively, for both Jake and I.
Jake, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think not dissimilar, maybe not quite so fixated on the motorsport, but what's the story? Like, what's the why? Why are we doing this? What are we trying to convey to people, and what are we trying to make them understand? And ultimately, what's the desired end result in terms of a fan? What do they need to leave this experience with? Obviously, a smile on their face, but what needs to be in their memory, and what do they need to take away from it?
That brings me on to a good point. I mean, we talk a lot about storytelling in events, don't we? I mean, how important is it? I know this is going to sound like a dumb question, but hey, how important is it? Do you find that you just can't stress this enough to clients? Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely key. I think in understanding their the wider context of what they're trying to link this into, like wider campaigns, so it doesn't feel like the activations are just a standalone piece, being able to tie that into their wider storytelling. And some clients it's easier than others, certainly. Some clients don't get that, or they really silo different elements of their campaigns, and you find that it is totally standalone. We're working with a client at the moment, and they have been very forthcoming with what their wider campaign across the whole of their F1 partnership is going to be, from TV to print to experiential. And it makes it so much easier for us to be able to guide that storytelling and guide the experience to something which is actually going to hit the brief.
Jake, how do you manage there's a fine line, isn't there? I know Rob alluded to it just then. Obviously, if you've got a budget to work with, then you can manage your ideas respectively, can't you? But often clients are reluctant to give you a budget. They want to hear all the ideas first. But how do you then manage that balance between the creativity, the practicality, and the clients' ever decreasing budgets?
Yeah, tell us about it. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I've had a project recently which is the same. It's balancing what is the impact this is going to have versus what's the lowest we can possibly get this budget. I'm of the opinion, and I've been to lots of Formula One events. Brands are showing up in a big way. It's very easy for a partner, not even a partner, a brand in general, to come in now and sort of be lost in the noise, purely because there is so much going on that's exciting and pushing things forward, implementing new technology, really, pushing the boundaries of what experiential can be. So yeah, it's selling that message and allowing clients to understand that sometimes, it's not a case of doubling the budget for double the result. Always, it's sometimes exponential. Sometimes the difference between, a medium-sized budget and a large budget will just allow us to do something that's so much better and so much tighter to the storytelling that we mentioned, and allow us the creative liberty around different parts of that activation and really going in and focusing on the details as well. I think that's what Rob and I can say that we've both learned from this Aramco project, is just the attention to detail on everything was another level, but we had the timelines and the finances to allow that to happen, which was great, because it allows us to put together an experience that is almost exactly how we wanted it.
You mentioned the Aramco project. You've obviously been in Saudi recently as part of the F1 Tour and Bahrain. I'm always curious when I get guests on that have worked across different markets. What was your experience working in the Middle East, and how different was that from, say, Europe or the US?
I'll just give you a little insight, and then Jake was on the ground actually for both the Bahrain and Saudi builds, so he's probably better placed. But
yeah,
Jake sent me a message and said we had a bit of accreditation for F1 races. Is always a bit of a headache, because you accredit through the local promoter and then you accredit through F1, and it's always you're never getting the information from the suppliers quite in time, and we're working with a local supplier on the structure, and normally it's a sort of thing where you'd expect maybe a crew of maybe 15, 20 guys maximum to do the structure and the AV. And Jake messaged me saying, there's 60 people accredited. We've got to accredit 60 people. And I said, how on earth are they sending 60 people in?
Labour's cheap.
So, labour is cheap, yeah. And I thought, well, what are all these people doing? But Jake can probably give you a much better idea of what all these people are doing, because he stood and watched them all. But yeah, certainly. I mean, the quality out there was great. Like what we delivered from the suppliers was fantastic. We were using Maestra, the arena company. So the attention to detail was great there. We got really a good experience from them. So I think over the last, since I've been in the events world, that's really focusing on this kind of stuff for the last 10 years, that you see the quality's really increased out in the Middle East. So, but yeah, Jake can give you a much better insight as to what it was like working boots on the ground over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going into the Saudi Bahrain project, I was expecting it to be a bit more of a battle than it actually was, in terms of the eye that we come with. The UK and Europe is good for lots of things, and our event delivery is one of those. The standard of events over here is something else. Like I think of Festival of Speed at Goodwood as an example. I was lucky to go to Watch Some Wonders at the start of this year, and that absolutely blew my mind in terms of the level of production and the level of budget that's going towards these booths. So sort of going straight from there to the Middle East, like I've been out in Bahrain, I've been out in Saudi, I've been out in Dubai working at events, and the standard of what is expected out there is definitely a few years behind what we're used to. It's coming up. There's no doubt about that, and it's coming up at a fast rate. But yeah, we were lucky that we were working with the partners that we were working with, and partners from a European background as well, who have that same sort of eye. It's easy when you go out to these different markets, and especially Dubai. I think, well, Dubai and Saudi and Bahrain the same. I remember being at an event in last year and looking at the level of finish on something, flagging it to someone, and it was like they couldn't see it. It was like we were talking two completely different languages. It's like, whereas in our world, you would never send something out the door looking like that. It's just there's a little bit of quality uplift to be done, I think. But yeah, as I said, it's certainly.
Now, I know this is probably in neither of your roles, business development, but at the time of recording, we've just had Mr. Trump visiting the Middle East, so clearly the region is enjoying a large spotlight at the moment. So how important is it for you as a business to perhaps get a foothold there? Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, and the amount of money that's being spent in the Middle East on sports is phenomenal, and the appetite around motorsport, especially in F1, is kind of at the top of that. It's really important for us. We have some kind of operational base out there. We have some kit out there. I think as the business grows, it's going to be, as with all sort of European-based events businesses, it's where everyone's kind of putting their eyes at the moment. I don't think it's going to be something that's going to change. I don't see that the tap is going to be turned off at any point in the Middle East. So it does absolutely make sense. I think it's going to be pretty key for our business over the next few years. How that sort of plays out, I'm not sure. The US expansion, again, is something we're sort of focusing on quite heavily. So yeah, certainly two big elephants to eat there, and we just need to take it sort of step by step. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be absolutely critical.
And Jake, just going back to Aramco again, I wanted to ask, How open are clients in the Middle East to sort of taking risk and innovation? I mean, I think of Aramco and I think of a very large conservative company. So how easy is it to pitch in some, really innovative ideas?
I think we can speak to that pretty well over our experience working on the project over the last sort of 2.5 years. The project came to us on a most of our projects do come to us on a pretty crazy timeline. It seems to be a pattern within the world of events, and especially in Formula One events. And a creative concept was turned around very quickly, but we were quite limited by what was producible in the time. And at that point, going towards a model where we were building in the UK and then shipping around the world. So ultimately, what we were able to achieve creatively was limited. I think the results from that after a 2-year campaign were pretty evident. We have lots of other fan zone activations that are more involved, that are more tech forward and immersive. And unfortunately, the previous concept just didn't stack up to that. So it put us in quite a nice position whereby we were able to sort of push some new ideas and take some risks. And as a company, they've been super open to it and willing to push the boundaries. And sort of like once we've got a few things through, now the ideas tap is very much turned on, and we're thinking about how we can continue to push that experience more and more, put more sort of tech into it, more touch points, and really like stretch the messaging. It's a nice one. As Rob said, they're not selling product to anyone in the fan zone. So we do have a little bit of creative liberty when it comes to the brand. We're very much focused on their synthetic fuel, which is coming into Formula One in 2026. So anything that we can do that's forward-leaning, that's tech-heavy, that's innovative, it doesn't really matter what it is, because it all sort of still ticks the same boxes in terms of representing Aramco in a way that is pioneering and doing something exciting and industry leading.
And just following on from that, I mean, I know obviously you guys work across the world, but are you seeing any trends in the experiential sort of field coming into play, specifically, in the Europe, US, and even in the Middle East?
Good question. I think that the quality of experiential is going through the roof. I think that everybody is trying to outdo everybody. And I think, absolutely, the quality of the finish and the delivery is just upping all the time. And Jake touched on there on Goodwood Festival of Speed. The level of delivery there is next level. But I think we're seeing that trickle down into everything that we do now. And clients have really high expectations, maybe not always budgets quite to match them. But yeah, I think that's a big thing that's happening for sure.
And then very briefly, I just wanted to touch on a sort of logistical side of working with F1. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, accreditation can be a complete ball ache sometimes. How have you found that? How have you found the challenges of fitting into that F1 circus as an experiential event company? What have some of the challenges been over the last sort of, what did you say, 2.5 years that you've been working with them?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think, and this, going back to a point before, this is very much where we try and hold clients' hands, is that we try to be their sort of local knowledge on a global scale. Like, I had a call the other day, and an agency says, "Oh, we'll just rent a Luton van for getting the kit from there to there during race day, and we'll restock the stand during the race day." And our operations head of operations, trackside operations, says, "Well, you can't do that because you can't get a Luton through that tunnel." I'm like, "Oh, right." They would have happily just rented a Luton and got to the tunnel and got stuck. And so it's all of those little nuanced things that's working at F1, and knowing the promoters and knowing what you can do and what you can't do and where you park and all of those little things and how the accreditation works, and the fact that we know F1 and we know the key people in there, so we can call them and get the answers for them. That's really where we're helping out clients a lot with the global circus that is F1. Shipping, everything. It's just a huge beast.
And then, Jake, before we wrap up, what's next for you guys?
Lots in the pipeline. I think we're in a really exciting place, not just as a business, but in Formula One in general. Formula One, as you'll have seen, has exploded on a phenomenal scale over the last few years. And it's now attracting some of the biggest brands in the world, but some of the biggest brands in the world who aren't just interested in putting a logo on the side of a car or just having their logo next to Formula One's in press releases. It's really about coming and activating and showing up for fans. They gain a pretty unique marketing opportunity when they sign up to a Formula One partnership, of being able to, have a captive audience within the track. So yeah, I think we're in an exciting place in terms of lots of new opportunities coming on board, a move towards doing more touring setups, and just continuing to pump out cool stuff.
And then finally, I know you're both F1 fans. I'm going to go out on a limb here, not much of one, but I'm going to guess that you're both music fans as well. And we've been asking everybody this on the podcast. I think it's sometimes offers an interesting insight and sometimes gets a bit of a giggle. But music then, what's on your playlist? Rob, what have you got on your playlist right now?
Jake's the music one in this,
really?
duo for sure. Yeah, mine's quite eclectic. It depends on what the day is, absolutely. But yeah, been listening to quite a lot of sort of ambient hip hop type stuff at the moment, just when I'm working. That's been quite big on my playlist at the moment.
Jake?
Mine's completely the other end of the spectrum. I spent my university years DJing in nightclubs and festivals, so my playlist is very much sort of drum and bass, jungle heavy, very high energy. I think some of the people in the office would be terrified at the sort of thing that's going on in the headphones while I'm still managing to get work done.
Brilliant. Well, listen, guys, can I wish you the best of luck? Thanks for joining me on the podcast. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
EventNewsDXB was presented by myself, Ian Carlos. The studio engineer and editor was Roy DeMonte. The executive producer was myself and Joe Morrison. And this podcast is a co-production between Warehouse 4 and W4 Podcast Studio. And if you haven't done so already, please do click that follow or subscribe button. See you next time.
Event News DXB.